Right, so back on with bits for Warren's. We're now at the stage where we've got that bumper done. The front scoop is a lot better now. We've tweaked that and improved it, made a whole new one obviously. One of the other things we need to do is get the engine oil cooler remounted and get air ducted to it and away from it, and then also the gearbox cooler. So we've been waiting for some parts to arrive. We've got a nice little collection. We'll just go through some of the bits we're going to use on the oil coolers. Firstly, we've got Mocal core. We use Mocal cores with all of our kits. The only difference with this one is we've got -6 fittings on, because it's just going to be for the gearbox. I'm not exactly sure how much extra oil we'll run in the gearbox yet. We'll be able to pretty much run as much as we want. We will need like a breather system to go with it. It's not quite as simple as just getting a pump and additional cooler. We've got to control it, be able to turn it on and off. Of course, the pump can't really pump cold oil, so there's a lot of things to take into account rather than just kind of fitting a cooler core. But then we've also got some ducts to go with them. So these are like off-the-shelf ducts. You can kind of buy these. I think they're a Revotech part. And they've got, you know, a nice inlet, sprays out over the whole cooler core, and then the plan is to put another one on the other side so that we have the air ducted into it, super efficient, and then back out the other side. The only thing I'm not sure about with these is because they're quite long. So when we kind of sandwich two together, you end up with what is quite a lot of material to try and mount behind that bumper in front of the wheel arch. So we may not end up using all these. We may end up either making some aluminium ones or doing some 3D printed ones or something like that. But that's the plan. That's kind of how we're going to do that. So they'll just sit behind those holes that we'll cut in the front of the scoop, which we'll show in a minute. And then the other stuff we've got is just a load of Mocal and Jiffy Tight stuff. The biggest thing is the pump. So the engine has its own oil pump, and that pumps the oil around the engine and keeps everything lubricated. Of course, the gearbox doesn't have its own oil pump because originally the gearbox would have no cooler. It's only on usually like rear wheel drive cars with the diffs in the back or something like that, where you tend to have some kind of oil cooler on a car. So we've got to mount a pump, and then obviously we've got to control that pump. The pump isn't really designed for pumping cold oil, so we need a way of controlling it. We'll have to have a temperature sensor probably inside the gearbox, and then a temperature sensor post oil cooler, so that we know the temperature of the oil in the gearbox, and then we know the temperature of the oil coming out of the oil cooler. That way we can accurately turn the pump on and off. There's quite a few ways we could do that. Really simple ways, just with a switch and a temperature gauge, so that as the oil hits the temperature we want to turn the pump on at, Warren just flicks a switch and then it pumps. Given that the car doesn't normally run for a long time, that is a really simple, easy way of doing it. And that's probably the way we'll do it to start with, to try it out. But I think in the long term, it'd be far nicer if it was all automatic. And that's not too hard to do either, because we can just use like an Arduino microcontroller, which is basically just like a little computer. And we can program that to have a sensor input, turn on a relay, which turns on the pump. And then once the oil in the gearbox gets to the correct temperature, it just turns the pump back off again. And that'll also allow the pump to continue running even when the engine's off, without Warren having to get back in the car to turn it off. It can just do it all automatically. So that's the pump. And then all the other bits we've got are just your kind of, I say standard fittings. We've gone for all Pro Gold fittings on everything. So these are a bit nicer than the fittings we normally use in our kits, but they are quite a lot more expensive. The benefit of these is they're quite a lot lighter. and then for the gearbox, so that we can get the gearbox in and out if it does need any work doing to it. Again, we don't need to try and build in maintenance safeties, so that if we've got 5 litres of oil in the oil system in the gearbox rather than the normal quantity, every time that gearbox needs to come in and out, we need a way that we can quickly and easily just disconnect the cooler lines. So again, it's potentially a bit over the top, but we've got dry brake fittings. Again, these are quite expensive, but I think you only really will have to undo those lines a couple of times, get oil everywhere, and then think, try and cap them off. There's got to be a better way of doing this. And again, the way they do it in motorsport is with these type of dry brake connectors. So like one of these will probably go on the side of the pump, and one of them will probably go on the side of the gearbox. And it is just a case of connecting them up, and they'll easily take the pressure that pump can throw at it. So one of the first jobs is we've now got some little bell mouths which are going to go in there, and then on the back we'll be able to put our hose or some kind of flexible convolute style thing, and then that will then pipe onto the duct if we've got enough space for it. Again, until I got a pair of these, it's hard to guess if there's going to be enough room behind there. So yeah, that's the first thing to do really. We need to get the bumper back off again, mount these in the front scoop, and then see where we can put the actual oil cooler core. Right, so I've got some holes chopped in this scoop now. Didn't have a big enough hole saw. Pretty sure I had a 3-inch hole saw, but apparently not. So what I've done is just sliced it out and then sanded them out with the whizzer to get them to the right diameter. So now just a case of, I want to put it back on, double check the positions of these are going to be okay, and then we can weld them on. I've already cleaned off a load of the powder coat, so that when I push them through there, I can just kind of put a few blobs of weld on, just hold them in. I don't think they're going to fall out. They don't need to be substantially welded, but yeah, just want to double check before I go and hold them in place. The other thing I've done now is I've got nutserts in the front of the, or rib nuts, whatever you want to call them. Loads of people call them loads of different things, in the front of the radiator, so that I can just bolt this scoop on and off. When I first made it, I tacked it to the radiator to get it, just make it easy to fabricate. And then I've now put some flanges on top and bottom, and that'll just bolt up on there then, just like that. Throw that in, hopefully that fits. Oh, like a dream. So yeah, just need to get them tacked into position. That one's a bit tight, might just shave a bit more out the top of that one. Just shave a bit more out of that, I think. Just pushing the bumper down a touch. We've got a bit of clearance at the top, so I think I'll probably just shave a bit more out of that hole. It'll push that up a touch, but yeah, I think that's going to be fine. And then I'll probably just put some little blanking pieces in to cover these holes up after. Again, it would have been a bit easier if I had a hole saw, but seemed like the easiest way of doing it at the time. Just chop a bigger hole out than you need, then fill it in. Right, so I've got these all tacked in now. I'm not sure I'm going to weld them on like proper. I don't think we really need to. They shouldn't be coming out. I'm probably just going to block up the back of that hole, but I'll do that at some point in the future. No need to watch me do that now. So now it's just a case of trying to figure out where we're going to put the oil cooler and the ducts that go with it. So all of that is going to be kind of behind the bumper work. So we need to figure out what space we've got and then where we're actually going to mount it, because obviously there is a bit of space between this opening and the brake ducts, and I think that's, we'll probably have the oil cooler in that kind of position so that the ducting more or less kind of comes straight round at an angle like that, and it'll go out again, and we'll probably end up getting this back out through the wheel arch, I think. I'm not 100% sure until we actually start to mount things. It's just going to be where it's convenient, I guess. We could get it out through the floor, but just get some air to it first, I guess. Right, so I've got one of these oil cooler cores assembled with like a scoop on either side of it now. And this is when they start to become a bit big and a bit harder to mount. But where I was planning on putting it, it's pretty much going to work, really. I think we're going to put it pretty much behind the bumper, like as high up as we can get it, so it's out the way of the what will be the ducting coming through for the brake caliper cooling, and it'll pretty much sit as close to the bumper as I dare, I think. Obviously, we want to have the easiest route into the duct possible with like flexible type convolute tubing, your standard like air conditioning type tube and tumble dryer type stuff everybody uses for these kinds of things, because it's perfect for that. It doesn't tend to last very long, but it does work quite well. So yeah, I think we'll keep it quite high. Again, just so that we're not, it can't go any lower than that, because that's the bottom of the bumper. So I think it'll be quite high. We'll obviously have to move the horn. We won't have that problem the other side. But yeah, we'll have to move the horn, and it'll sit quite high, quite close to the back of the bumper, and then it'll allow us to easily vent out either the front wheel arch. I need to do some reading again, because I'm not sure if that's the best. Out the floor would be better, or out the back of the front wing. Warren doesn't have these cut out or spaced. That's something we might change, but yeah, we can get it back out again from there, no problem. And it doesn't interfere with the wheel clearance either. Then, even with how much like caster this is set up for, we've still got plenty of wheel clearance, and we can route the hoses really easily. Obviously, I'm using the gearbox oil cooler here, one with the -6 lines on, just to kind of mock up. But obviously, on an Astra H, the oil cooler lines for the engine are only here. So the oil cooler lines are going to be really short, which is good. Means a more efficient cooling system. So we just need to look at how we're going to make some brackets, really. I think at the top one will be easy, because we can just come off this piece that mounts the wing. Probably make something fairly crude, I guess. It doesn't need to be anything mega. Hi. I think we'll probably just mount it off the top of there, and then we just need something to stabilise it, probably across to this chassis point here. We'll just create something to go across there, and then that can probably also be used to help mount the splitter. So if we make something fairly substantial along the bottom, so it'll mount that no problem, and then we can also use it to mount the splitter with. So that's probably one of the next things to start thinking about as well. How we're going to create that lower half bracket. So yeah, a bit more tinkering. So I've been playing with it a bit, and I've concluded a couple of things. One is that the flexible type tubing you usually use for connecting these kinds of like vents up with things is really annoying, in that it ends up being cable tied. You don't really ever have much slack in it, so then again it becomes getting the bumper on and off becomes really hard work, and stripping the car down becomes really hard work every time. And we want to make sure that's easy. And so I've got a couple of ideas about how we can do that. and we actually need to mount like a kind of female end into the bumper. Much like we've got the scoop on the inside of the bumper and then the bumper butts up to it. We kind of need that for these here. So we need like an internal piece which is mounted to the body of the car, which those kind of slot into or over. Else it's going to get really awkward to get the bumper on and off every time. Again, I want to do this properly, and there's going to be more work in doing that, but I think it will end up being better. And then the other kind of thing I've come to conclude is that I wanted to mount the oil cooler at this kind of angle, so that this end, the inlet, the hose for it would run over the top of the brake duct here and between the chassis leg. And there isn't really going to be enough room. I kind of knew that, but I thought, persevere a bit, take a look at it, squash some tube down, see what it looks like fit in there, and it looks terrible. You know, it's just not right. In an ideal world, well, you could just move the brake ducts, but we can't do that because they're fixed. We also can't really move where the oil cooler ducts are. They only really go in one place. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to mount the oil cooler the other way around. So the hose for it will come in, or the kind of whatever we end up using, hose type thing, will come into the oil cooler. We'll show you better from underneath. But it'll come into the oil cooler, and then as it comes out, we can actually vent it up, and hopefully up and out of the wing through some kind of knacker duct. Now, or some kind of like vent, that body vent. The reason for doing it that way is if we go up with it, kind of mount it at this angle. So I'll just show you on the outside. So before I wanted to mount it like that, and it doesn't really fit well. There isn't really enough room to get a hose through here and then down into that. There's not really enough room. So if we mount it the other way, we actually get plenty of room because there's plenty of room under here, and that's actually a bit of a better route for that hose. And then we can actually duct it out through the wing. And that's a better way of doing it for two reasons. If we vent out through the wheel arch and through the floor, that, like technically, like by the book, that's not a good way to vent the air, because we've already got air pressure that will be venting it out of the wheel arch anyway. And that's why sometimes you see people cutting the back of the front wheel arch out. It's to allow air, which gets trapped as the wheel rotates, to go out the back of the wheel arch. And so we don't really want to kind of vent it into the wheel arch, which we would have to do if we ran it that way, because we would have nowhere other than through the floor. That's the only other option, through the floor. And again, we've got a similar issue there, because we're not really going to have much floor here. We're going to have a big splitter, but not really any floor. So all we're going to do is vent air into an area where, again, it's going to get trapped. If we mount it that way, we can actually duct it up into the wing, and we could actually vent it out, you know, anywhere we like, really, anywhere a vent would fit. And it will actually give us the same effect as what the bonnet scoop has. So with the bonnet scoop, the air comes into the front of the car, is forced through the radiator and then out and over the car, and that actually kind of generates some kind of downforce onto the car and aids the aero. Now, we're not going to have a whole lot of air coming through these oil coolers, but if we vent it out either side through the wheel arch, I think that will actually be much better. Again, this is all just theory from what you can read on the internet and, Time Attack Builders Facebook forum thing. And it seems like that would be the better way of doing it. If we go through the floor or through the wheel arch, it's just getting messy. So if I mount the oil cooler this way, we actually do end up with a far better type of inlet and outlet. So I think that's going to be the best way to go. I did already kind of chop a bracket up to use at the top, but I think it will work pretty much the same. It's just one of our normal oil cooler brackets I've chopped up. So I'm just going to unbolt that, bolt it on the other end, and just plonk it in there and just see what it looks like when you can kind of take your hands away and have a better look. Because that's the thing, half the time you're kind of holding something in there and you're trying to see what it looks like. And so yeah, I'll just swap that bracket over and see what it looks like. Right, so I've snapped that bracket, but I've welded it back together again at an angle, and I've got this is actually the one I'm using, is the gearbox oil cooler, because the engine oil cooler is still connected to the engine. I don't want to disconnect it until I have to, because oil will go everywhere. But anyway, besides the point. I've got this one bolted on to the car in roughly where I think it's going to want to go. So we'll show from behind. So we've got the air coming in now, which will come from over there, up here, through the oil cooler core, and then out, and then we can duct that up through the wing up here. And that still leaves plenty of room for brake ducting through here, and we've got plenty of room for the actual wheel arch of the wheel. Obviously it's quite big wheels on it, so we need to make sure that there's enough room for that and for fittings. I can still get it a bit further away yet, but there's plenty of room. It's kind of hard to imagine when there's not a wheel here, but if you put wheel in, you can't see anything. So yeah, there's plenty of room like that, and I think that's going to be about the best way of doing it. So what we need to do now is try and figure out how we're going to mount it from the bottom, because obviously I can't leave it like that. I need to mount it both ends, and that's going to become part of what we'll mount the splitter as well, I think. I'm not sure the bumper's going to be permanently attached to the splitter. I think the splitter will be a thing on its own attached to the subframe, and I think that's going to be the easiest way of actually mounting the lower half of the oil cooler core. It will actually mount off the splitter. So yeah, that's the next thing to do really. So that's that cooler mounted on the driver's side, which will be the engine oil cooler. We're basically going to do exactly the same thing on the passenger side, so I won't bother showing you that. It'll mount in exactly the same way. But like I say, now we need to concentrate on how we're going to do the lower half of the bumper, the kind of splitter, and the beginnings of the flat floor. So that's kind of a whole other job in itself. So yeah, we'll probably leave this here, and we'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.